Hello, good evening to our audience uh, back home, and good afternoon to our members and audience here in North America. I am coming back to talk about a very important issue that we wanted to address this year. That issue is the issue of conflict resolution and peace building for the Oromo, for other peoples of Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. The Oromo being the largest ethno-nationalist group in the Horn of Africa, would have a very big role to play to have peace, security, and stability. And it's very important that we focus on this topic and also learn from history. So my talk today should be taken as a talk from someone who is not a career politician, who is not a historian, but who is a student of history by choice, and who also has an interest in learning about the Oromo culture, the legacies of the past and current leaders of the Oromo people. So in honor of the late Professor Hamdesa Tusso and many of the Oromo scholars who have studied war and conquest under the successive Ethiopian regimes and the era of many kings, and the era where the Oromo had sovereign power in the Horn of Africa. I wanted to just focus on this topic for the coming months and share my personal take, my personal perspectives on what I believe should be the way forward for peace to reign, for peace and stability for the Oromo that have long suffered from lack of good political leadership, good governance during the last many decades. So I yesterday and the day before, I was talking about the life and the legacy of one of the early Boran Oromo leaders and a development activist and a very dedicated community servant of his people, Mr. Boru Dacha, who used to be in the transitional government of Ethiopia until the Oromo Liberation Front was expelled from the government and most of its leaders were forced into exile. So that was what gave me motivation to actually come and talk about talk to people and also talk about these issues. I wanted to focus a little bit on this book that I wrote. In this book that is mainly a contribution from a young Oromo physician who worked among his people, who actually realized that there were not many historians and not many sociologists who could actually capture a very important moment in our history. A lot of Oromo historians, politicians were either exiled or were forced into silence. And there were sociologists and historians that I used to know who used to work for NGOs or who teach in the universities. But there are maybe things that those people should have done, such as writing books and making sure that we don't blame others for not telling our history the way we want, and instead to write our history ourselves. So at that time, I was very much interested in learning about the roles of the Boran Oromo traditional institutions. I wanted to understand the norms and the values and the laws, because I know that the Boran Oromo had a political sovereignty. Centuries ago, they were independent. They had rulers, leaders who are elected, who serve their people for just one term of 8 years. And I wanted to really read more, talk to more of the Boran elders and the Boran Gada leaders, and try to also learn more about the issues that they talk about during the ritual migrations between the two Boran territories, east and west, the Dire and the Liban. And I wanted to also contribute. And I was very much interested in learning and contributing my share to whatever was being done to actually highlight the roles of these Oromo traditional institutions and contribute to societal development. So at that time, there were conflicts. The Ethiopian ruling party, the TPLF, and its coalition of parties, the EPRDF, were persecuting a lot of Oromo educated people. Our people were dispossessed, impoverished, institutions were almost destroyed. So there were a lot of war between tribes and between, the Oromo and the Somali tribes, and there is conflict that are usually instigated by the regime so that disenfranchised and disempowered people don't have the power to resist and demand their rightful place in that country. So there was a lot of conflict, and the Boran Gada leaders and some of the people within the NGOs were trying to somehow mitigate those conflicts. Mitigate in a sense, whenever there is conflict, there are people that are displaced and providing some support, food, assistance. And then the NGOs would just do some piecemeal development stuff, just to mitigate the impacts that those conflicts were having. There were conflicts everywhere. And there were efforts by the Boran leaders to somehow talk about what can be done to maintain peace and harmony, maybe among the Boran people internally, and all these conflicts that was being waged between the neighboring Oromo and Somali tribes. And I happened to take part in the Gumi El Dallo Assembly in Liban. That is the Boran territory east of Dawa River. Liban is a historical homeland of the Oromo, of the Boran, the Guji, and other Oromo tribes. And I know that before there were nation states, before there was Ethiopia, before there was Kenya or Somalia as a nation state, there used to be what we used to hear in folk songs and etc. Biye Borana. Even the Oromo from the center, when they were pushed out, when they were persecuted and defeated by the Showa king, who became later the emperor of Ethiopia, Menelik, a lot of the Oromo from Showa migrated to what is today's Bale zone of Oromia, to Borana. And there is a folk song about Biya Borana. Biya Borana, Gotadde Majennan Sesni Kajele. It's like a sovereign, it's a country where you would go to seek a refuge. It's a vast, and at that time, Biya Borana does not refer to what is today's Borana. It was a territory where the Boran Oromo had hegemonic kind of power over, where their cattle, their people can go as far as they want in search of pasture and water and etc. So my understanding is that what is today's East Borana, or the Liban, we actually call Dirre Liban. Dirre Liban, and that Liban historically stretches all the way to what is now the western part of the Ogaden or the Somali region, Charite, After, and we have all the Borangada leaders that used to actually wage wars and live in Charite and at the Chuarab all the way down to Baidawa and deep into northern Somalia and northern Kenya. There, before there was the British colony in Kenya, the Boran had hegemony over most of northern Kenya, northeastern Kenya, as a hegemonic power. That hegemonic power came not only with the military organization that the Boran had, but also a political system that would help the Boran to administer effectively, where there is accountability, the rule of law, and justice. Justice, in a sense, every smaller ethnic group that did not have the military organization, that did not have the political organization to either administer the vast areas where all the tribes live, the Boran had the political organization to hold their own people, their own army, accountable to the system that is there to govern human beings, govern the land, the resources, and everything. So that system is the Gada system, the Rabagada. Those are leaders that have been the leaders that were elected, not like one or two. It's just the entire people in Borana have the right to vote, the right to vote for a clan leader, a Hayu, or a clan councillor. And then there were Boran kind of federation where there is the Boran Gada assemblies, Gada leaders, the main, and there are other smaller Gada leaders or councils that are also were there to govern, and laws are made. They have leaders, and they have also institutions that basically makes law and not only makes law like the Gumigayo, where all the custodians of the institutions such as Gada and the Kalu and other uh, uh, actors within the Boran country would come to deliberate on issues and proclaim the laws of the land and resolve conflicts and hold perpetrators accountable, including their own leaders. Their own leaders who failed to honor the laws of the land shall be punished, shall be expelled from the parties, because the Borana had, when I say the Gada, the Raba Gada is a political system. It's a system of rule. It's actually a rules-based system. So the Oromo, I'm talking about the one of the Oromo group, and the same can be said for other Oromo groups, whether it is the Guji or the Arsi and others. But the Boran holds a unique place in the Oromo history for preserving what is known today as the Gada system. The other place where the Gada system somehow existed in its rudimentary form was the Guji. And we know that among the Guji Oromo, even during the regime of Haile Selassie and Derg, the Gada system was extremely weakened, and the institutions were disenfranchised, and the Gada leaders were forced to actually practice the Gada rule clandestinely. It's the Boran that, for whatever reasons historians could mention, managed to preserve the Gada institution and what we know now as one of the best heritage of an African nation or an African society. There can be kings, there can be chiefdoms, etc., right? We have heard of the Ashanti of this and that, or the sultanates of this and that. Those are all replicas of kings, people that rule forever, for life. But when it comes to the Gada, it's a system. That's what here in America and the West, they call it rules-based system. Nowhere did a political society, a society had a system as advanced as the Gada, right? So what is in this Gada system? Is it administrative only? Do they have mechanisms to resolve conflict? Do the Oromos 300 years ago know how to resolve conflicts and maintain peace among themselves, or maintain peace for others with whom they share resources? What is the lesson that we learn from the Oromo generations, leaders that lived 300 years ago? So this one is, I just want for one last time, want to mention about this book. It was published in year 2005. The three leaders here that you see here are the three Boran Abagadas. Abagada, Liban Jaldesa, and Borbor. And then there was Hiddogalgalo. They are both Abagadas. One is a prime counselor, like a prime minister, and the others are ministers or leaders of each of the other three Gada assemblies. And they rule, there are 6 of them, six most senior Gada councillors called Adula Hayu and the Bagada of Arbora here, Liban Jaldesa, whose father also 40 years before him used to be an Abagada, was the Hayufite, which can be translated as the prime counselor, the prime minister, and not a president, because the other leaders are also Abagadas of their own Gada assemblies, and they have agreed generations ago that the three Gada assemblies would live together, would govern their constituent populations, and that they work as one political, as one system, and where they are all accountable to the Gumigayo, accountable to the biggest assembly, Pan Oromo, Pan Boran Assembly, where the Kalu institution custodians and the Gada leaders and all actors within what is the Boran country, what was the Boran country, would come and be held accountable to whatever they have done. So there were conflicts that these Gada leaders tried to resolve, and I would discuss about the Gumi Eldalo Assembly, and then I will discuss about the Gumi Siricholae, the Gumi Simper Balal, and I will also talk later about war and conquest. And there are many ways to write about a people. Some of the people write about war and conquest. If it comes to the Oromo, after they lost sovereignty in Ethiopia, before there was a modern nation state of Ethiopia, there were a people. There were kings and sultanates and etc. The Oromo in the center, southeast, and the west were conquered, defeated with the help of the Western powers, with the Christian Western powers, and the guns that they managed to get, and all the slaves the Ethiopian kings were able to sell into slavery to Middle Eastern, these Arab countries, and whatever, or Asian. The kings of Ethiopia used to have actually some existence and power, but they did not have sovereignty over all of the East African regions. So the Oromo was conquered, defeated, and later on more territories were annexed or conquered, and the modern Ethiopian nation state with its current boundaries was negotiated with other powers, the British that was in Kenya and others. So that one way to describe our history is also to write about the history of the conquest and resistance. Resistance would also inspire a people that was defeated and that doesn't know what sacrifices were made to have a political, to have sovereignty over their own affairs, would feel they were inferior. But if someone writes about a conquest and resistance, like Professor Abbas Ajgenamo, someone would write about a conquest and defeat or resistance of a people when a nation state was built. I am not talking mostly about the conquest. Conquest had been there, right? Small tribes in East Africa. There has always been, long before the coming of the colonial powers. We know that in Africa, ethnic groups used to have wars between, I mean, among themselves. Wars because some wars happen because of disputes over resources, or because one ethnic group wants to claim hegemony over a territory, or maybe for all of this. So I always, as I was trying to prepare for this talk, I wanted to also see how I kind of present my talk. And I said, there is war, there is conquest. And I could talk about the Boran Oromo as a hegemony. There were wars. I was reading my own notes. There were wars. There were wars between, especially some of the Somali tribes, and the Boran, for most part, used to win all the wars until the colonialists came to Africa. To my understanding, there used to be wars, and that's why in history the Boran Oromo is considered to be a hegemony, because it was a very formidable society with a military organization that was unparalleled. The Boran Oromo, let alone the other Oromos, as vast, we can go as West Oromia, Kelem, West Wallaga, north to Wallo. The Boran Oromo alone was enough historically to claim hegemony over the Somalis before the colonialists arrived in Africa. The Boran Oromo were a hegemony. Hegemony means they had a military organization and a system that is superior. And every word of they fought against tribes, whether that is the tribes, the nomadic tribes in Kenya or in Somalia, the Boran would win. And they could claim sovereignty over any area where their people and their livestock had to go looking for pasture. So that was a hegemony, right? It's a people that was very powerful. But sometimes it's good to know how powerful you were and how you lost that power. One of the reasons was the colonial boundaries and the formation of nation states. And the other is probably also how you failed to learn from history. From history of why you were so powerful at one time and what changed for you to actually lose that power. So I have a brother, Kadiro, you know. Kadiro wrote this book. I wish he had written more books. He had all the materials. A history, a people that either Professor Abbas Hajganamo wrote about the RC Oromo war of conquest and resistance. And then times changed. There was the Oromia state as we know it. There is Ethiopia as a country that we know about. And there are people that also focus on a history and human rights issues. Just human rights within, whether that is Ethiopian nation state in its current shape and form, or Oromia as one country that is within Ethiopia that has some kind of autonomy, and people that aspire for independence, people that aspire for a bigger power within Ethiopia and maybe in the east of Africa. Those are all many ways that Oromos look at things. We don't have the same worldly view for all the Oromos. But Kadiro was focused on human rights. In the formation, in the process to establish Ethiopian nation state, huge prices, a lot of sacrifices, and a lot of tribes, a lot of ethno-nationalist groups were conquered, defeated, dehumanized, and some of their children sold into slavery. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that if it sometimes the tragedy will not should not lead to another tragedy, but sometimes it's important that we learn from history. And when the tragic loss of lives and the loss of sovereignty of many smaller sovereign tribes or nationalities, and then the subsequent dehumanization. If people learn from that history, then the same will not be repeated. And one book that I was trying to go through and somewhat kind of sharpen my memory. So, war, conquest, and resistance, and human rights. And wars were not only waged by the Ethiopian kings and emperors. There were wars between tribes, right? We know that. So we have to acknowledge that we don't only have wars between, the Ethiopian kings and the other peoples of Ethiopia. There were wars of conquest between tribes, even way before the arrival of the colonialists. Coming back to my main talk, and people who want to now ask a question about what is this talk all about. It's about what the Oromos used to do to maintain peace. I want to talk about peace building efforts when there used to be wars between the Oromos and other tribes, the Boran Oromo, and sometimes conflicts between the Boran Oromo clans. Yes, clans. There used to be wars, but there had to be an institution that institutional mechanisms to resolve, and a very good leader that knows how to use those tools, institutional mechanisms that is in place to resolve those conflicts. So, from the time of the firstborn Abagada, Abaiba Bohoro, was a Boran Abagada that actually ruled. There are people that say that there were past Gada institutions before Abaiba Bohoro. And when Abaiba Bohoro was the first Gada leader, the Boran has a political system, parties. There are clans. The clans, we know in what is today's the Boran Oromo, we have about 17 bigger tribes. We have the Digalu, we have the Matari, and we have the Karayu. very big tribes. And then we have other 14 smaller tribes that are today we have them into two divisions. 7 clans on one, Fulele, 7 clans or tribes, smaller, in another division called Harores. So there used to be Boran tribes, and each of the tribe would have a tribal leader, and but we did not have what we know today as Sabbo Orgona. When Abaiba Bohoro was the Abagada, there was a Gada system. But that Gada system has been developed whereby clan leaders are elected, and there are political parties that you can, by birth from a certain generation, you join into those parties, and then the system had to be perfected. And there are always wars. In wars, war leaders have to mobilize. There are victories and sometimes setbacks, and setbacks leads to sometimes disagreements and groups that are maybe disenfranchised after the wars that was fought. But anyways, what I wanted to say was that the Gada system was in existence for, I think, well over 550 years, right? That was before America was conquered by the Europeans, right? When Christopher Columbus came and discovered America, even at that time, an Oromo society in Africa had political organizations where leaders are elected and serve only for one term of 8 years, and whereby children of those rulers will have to be educated, will have to be taught, and join the political system and serve within the military organizations of that tribe and assume power 40 years after their fathers. That political system, my friends, was before 560 years. And there was no America as we know it today at that time. And Europeans were fighting bloody wars. So Africa was not only, you can talk about the Egyptian civilization as a civilization that built the pyramids. And there were books that were written about the Abrahamic religions. But it's a system of kings and rulers. And there were literatures about religions that originated in Middle East. But talk about institutions that existed for hundreds of years where leaders were elected, and we know about their names. We don't have that type of political system in Europe or in America. But we have that kind of a system, a governance, an elected leader that we know about by name, Abaiba Bohoro, was the first Abagada of the Boran Oromo, And at that time, that system, the clans elect their leaders, counselors, and then they have the Geda as the overarching, as that bigger institution where all the tribes come together, but it had to be perfected. That was the current Gada system, as you know, not the primordial that existed. Probably some people say for maybe way beyond the medieval period. Some people might argue that it could be 1,000, 2,000 years old. But the one that we know about for sure is the current Gada system that was created and whose leaders, all of them we know by name. Let's talk about Abaiba Bohoro. And then, Gadayo Galgalo. I misspoke. The first Abagada was not Abaiba Bohoro, but Gadayo Galgalo. Abaiba Bohoro is actually an Abagada that was also known in history for defiance, who was basically impeached for failing to respect the rules of the land, for actually committing horrific acts, who had to be evicted and run away into the faraway lands of what is today Somalia. That is Abaiba Bohoro. So Abaiba Bohoro, a Gada leader that, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 300 years ago, as I said, the Gada system of the Boran Oromo is older than 560 years. And Gadayo Galgalo did not live where the majority of the Boran live now, but in terms of the territory where Oromos used to live, when did some of the, what is today's southern, Bale, and people used to talk about, Robe and all this, because the Oromo had grown, and the Boran Oromo would talk about ritual migrations going all the way through what is today's Bulehora, Kuku, and all the way through Robe and then southern. And people might wonder, why are we in all of these places? It's because people have shared history. People move around and they exist in one territory, live there for hundreds of years, and some people go, there is war, conquest, mergers, and federations, coalitions. So the history of mankind is not linear. It's not like a tribe grew out of something. You just don't grow from one, like a primate. You know how some of the evolutionists believe that we evolved. We evolved from something that looks like primates, monkeys, and apes, and we became humans. That is one theory called the evolutionary theory of mankind's existence. Another, okay, let us just come to how we have tribes and peoples and we have clans and we have an RC Oromo in all of this vast area that we call RC, and we have an RC clan in Borana. We have Machitu in Borana, and we have Macha in Shawa and Walega and Jimma. We grew. People grow, populations grow. And subclans become clans. A bigger clan would become maybe a tribe. That is how human societies grew and will continue to grow. And regarding the Boran Gada system, I wanted to emphasize about Gada as an administrative system, as a political system that is not only unique but a heritage of mankind of a black Africa. That it can be argued that it was not copied and pasted. It wasn't like a constitution of France or the United States or England that we copied when we became nation states after the colonialists left, right? Most of the African constitutions were just copied and pasted from, right? Some of the nations that probably never had institutions wanted to use democracy as a Western created idea. Mankind, created a system of governance where leaders are elected. What if we argue that, come on, before there were elected leaders, not leaders that became leaders after a military conquest, but leaders that actually used to be elected with a system that never got interrupted. Generations after generations, wars after war, a system prevailed, leaders elected and ruled with accountability. That is how the people that we now talk about, the Oromo, the Borana, used to have not only a hegemony, but also used to have a legitimate hegemonic power, because everywhere they conquer, they occupy, there is a rule of law and there is justice for the animals, how you govern the resources and the people that are conquered, or who became maybe an ally. You became an ally. Sometimes you are asked to submit or you refuse. Maybe you get defeated. You didn't have a military organization to resist. And then finally, you choose to be part of that system as long as that system treats you fairly and justly. Like, do I have the same prerogatives, the same rights as the people that I'm joining into the alliance? Will I be treated fairly? Will I have the chance to be part of that system? Can I be elected into the position of power if we choose to be an ally? Yes, the answer is yes. I'm going to actually show how the Boran Oromo was inclusive, how peace was maintained. Not only wars were fought and won, but how justice prevailed. I earlier mentioned about an Abagada that was evicted, that was impeached and ran away. That is accountability. That was before there was a nation state in America. There was a colonial entity, but under the British probably at that time, but no nation state, no America as we know it today. But we had a system that hold its people, its leaders to account, and when leaders are found to be rogue and not respecting the rule of law, they got impeached and they ran away, maybe for their lives, into exile. So Abai Babohoro had to flee and seek refuge in a faraway place. That is, my friends, is a system that doesn't only administer, but that hold its own leaders accountable. So that can be taught as a history, as a heritage of mankind. That, you know, we don't only learn from the history of the Chinese now, Confucius, or that of the great Egyptian or Greek mathematicians and philosophers. Africa also had systems, had things that we can proudly say we contributed to mankind. Argue that there are systems of elections more advanced than the one that I am talking about now. Talk about where it existed. I'm not aware of the Maya civilization in the Americas. That I don't know. I'm not a historian. I know that there were civilizations here in what is today's Mexico and all of the Americas, Central, etc. There used to be all the native Indian tribes had systems, but I don't know of a system where they used to have elections every 8 years uninterrupted for hundreds of years. Let's talk about peace building. How we did not only create a system as a people, but we improved it. We perfected it. The Boran Oromo, as I mentioned earlier, had tribes. Some of these tribes were large, had a very large constituency or population. We can talk about the Karayu, very large tribe. We can talk about the Digalu and the Matari. And then there are other smaller groups. So the Borana used to have naturally, like any group, you cannot argue that the Oromos never had to fight. Even we fight between brothers and families, right? Inheritance. This is so common in history of mankind, in every society, every religion. Whoever wants to hide that the Oromo used to have a fight and infighting is naive or someone that doesn't know. It's not how we fought or whether we fought or not. It's how we overcome disagreements and differences and tried to maintain peace, and in the process of fighting, how we tried to also advocate for justice and fairness. That's what I'm talking about. The Oromo they fought. The Ethiopian ethnic groups fought. Kings fought with each other. Tribes fought with each other fiercely. And that is okay, because mankind has always fought. In Europe, we have hundreds of years of wars between the British and the French, hundreds of years, 100-year-old war that was fought between the European powers. So in Africa, there was a history of people fighting. So I am not going to say that we used to be one and we never had disagreements among ourselves. But I could say, however, although it is a human history that tribes fight, people sometimes fight between a family, brothers fight over inheritance, over resources and land, but also tribes fought. And in Borana, there used to be a time when tribes used to fight, disagree, and disagreements lead to some kind of maybe conflict. So one Abagada, a Boran Abagada called Liban Wata. I came to know about the history of Liban Wata 25 years ago when I was in Borana. I was sitting down with Boran elders and learning about the Boran history, not from the history books, but from the Boran elders that recounted the history of um, the Boran Gada leaders. I had a very wise man. His legacy can be disputed, but his passion is undisputed. He's a very eloquent speaker. Could have been a very brilliant, like, orator and professor. His name is Kararsa Gurach Kambare. Kararsa is a very brilliant man. He could go and learn some stories from other elders who would come and narrate. He's someone who is a born orator, and I learned from him. He is not very, very older than me, maybe 20 years older than me, but he is a very brilliant man. And I would say I learned a lot from him. And I came to know about the accomplishment and the histories of some of the early Boran Abagadas from Kararsa and other people that I had the opportunity to. I read Asmerom Legace's book. I read Gunther Schille's book about moving identities. I read about the articles written by Dr. Abdullahi Shongolo. I read about all the published materials from some of the earlier researchers, John Helland, with the Boran pastoralist, the Rangeland project. There are sociologists that I was interested in sociology. So I came to know about Liban Wata, and Liban Wata is a Boran Abagada who lived from 1783 up to 1790. My friends, that time is maybe 10 years or so after America's independence, right, as a country, 1776. This Liban Wata is remembered in history as the wisest Boran Abagada ever. How was he the wisest? There used to be conflicts amongst his people, and he wanted to resolve conflicts through holding a Boran, Oromo, and other actors within the areas they govern. He called the biggest assembly called Gumi Simper Balal. Gumi means assembly. Boran, Oromo, all the actors, stakeholders in what is today's Lebanon, in the Lebanon territory of, at that time, the Lebanon, they used to go as far as what is now Ogaden. Have read about wars they have fought everywhere. In Southern Bali, in what is now the Afdair zone in North Somalia. These people have ruled over all of these, lived over all of these areas, right? So Liban Wata called an assembly of the Boran leaders and all the actors to come so that they could talk about peace building, resolving conflicts through dialogue and negotiations. And he created a pact Liban, an alliance of the Oromo with the other tribes in what was then the Liban territory. There were smaller Somali groups that actually didn't have the military organization to challenge their rule, but they have a stake in maintaining peace. So there used to be the Dogodia. There used to be a small clan of Marihan here and there. There used to be the Karale, the Adjuran, and of course the Ogaden on the other side, the Ogaden tribe. So the Gumi Simper Balal, which I wrote in this book, not extensively, just a mention of the historical significance of the Gumi Simper Balal as one historical event or a part of the Oromo history where institutions were used and developed to resolve conflicts, and where the Oromo demonstrated that they don't only rule alone, and they create alliances, and alliances, they pledge allegiance to the rule of the land, and they agree to share resources, not only abide by the rules of the land, but also they agree to share the resources that the country where they live provides. And with that agreement, with the agreement that the tribes pledge allegiance and be ruled according to the rules of the land fairly and equally, Liban Wata created an alliance of people that maintained peace for the time he ruled as a Borana Bagada. That was from 1783 to 1790. That is 8 years. He is therefore remembered in the legacy of the Boran Gada leaders as the wisest of all. Of course, who is wiser than a man who knows how to reconcile differences between warring groups and bring them together and maintain peace? That, my friends, you can win wars, but you could fail to bring peace and stability to your country. But another wise man maybe has not won a war, but has learned a wisdom of bringing peace. So as equally important to win war is to maintain peace through negotiations and dialogue. What do you want? What can I give you? Where do we compromise? Okay, you want access to our resources, to where you need access to the pasture and the water, and right, you can use the resources, but we want you to pledge allegiance to our rules. Do not live in our country lawlessly. We have rules. Respect our rules. We respect your maybe sovereignty as a tribe, and you are free to go around and use our resources. That is one thing. Gumi Simper Balal. The other Boran Abagada that actually will be remembered in history as having the highest achievement during his rule was actually Dawe Gobo. That was an Abagada that lived before America was a colony of the British Empire. 1706 to 1714. This is a Bagada who ruled the Boran country from 1706 to 1714 for 8 years is called Dawe Gobo. Dawe Gobo is remembered in the Boran history as the greatest lawmaker. By the way, the Gada leaders are administrators. They do not make laws. But if you are wise enough to formulate a law that should be the law of the land, you have a critical mass of the clan leaders, the Hayus, and convince them with your wisdom to come and argue about why they have certain laws and how that is important to maintain peace and stability within that society. He argued that, listen now, this is also something that I believe should be taught in Ethiopian schools and universities. If people have not said this before me, let me say it, and I hope I will be able to make this historical account. I will be maybe able to make a good argument. Dawe Gobo, knowing that there used to be an infighting, conflicts between the tribes, the Borana had many tribes. Some of them are bigger and others are smaller. And they occupy vast territories in this East African rangeland, this pastoralist vast rangeland. And at that time, of course, there was no British such whatever, there was only, the Boran hegemony in North Kenya, northeastern, southern, what is now southern Oromia, and parts of Somalia, right? Remember that. It's a sovereign power. Because there was no nation state at that time. There are only tribes with systems and rulers that rule for a limited period of time, who will actually leave power to their successors peacefully. Elections happen, leaders rule and leave their legacy. And some people, you can leave a legacy and be proud of what you have accomplished. So Dawe Gobo created a system of exogamy. The Boran Oromo did not have what we now know as Sabo and Gona. There were tribes, some of them bigger and more powerful than others. But because people sometimes fight over resources or over heritage or over legacy, he said, why don't we create a moiety? A moiety means a division of the people into two big groups. He proposed that the Karayu, the Digalu, and Matari shall be one part of the society called Sabo, and the other 14 smaller tribes be divided into two subdivisions called Fulele and Haroresa. Each of the subdivision will have seven clans. Both of these smaller subdivisions will be the second moiety or the second division of the Boran society. And he said, why don't we have a rule that the Sabo, a man from this big group called Sabo, made up of 3 bigger tribes, can only marry a woman or a girl from the other moiety, and vice versa. He said, if we don't only have, what can we do? What can we do to make sure that we are bonded as a people? We are bonded and we shall never fight with each other. He said that was how many years ago now? 320 years ago. This wise Abagada said the Boran should have a system of moiety and exong. If I got this wrong, I hope I shall be forgiven. I know for sure, I'm not 100% sure that the moiety system was created for the first time at that during his rule, but I know that the rule of exogamy that became the rule of the land ever since he proclaimed that law at the Gumigayo Assembly of the 1710, because Gumigayo Assembly usually is held halfway between the term of Anabagada. He came to power 1706, left his office 1714, and therefore the Gumigayo Assembly probably happened around 1710. And he created a system of exogamy, and every born after that shall have a father that is from one division and a mother that is from another division of the Borana. So all the Boran will become in-laws. You could say, I am a Sabo, let's say a Karayu, because of this patriarchal system. Then your mother is not actually from a woman from the same moiety. It has to be a woman from another small. If you are a Digalu, it should be from another smaller tribe, and therefore, and vice versa. And every Boran is born to a mother from one moiety and a father from another, and vice versa. That system of marriage is called exogamous marriage. You marry only to a tribe or a clan that is on the other. So every Boran, so the Boran is basically a very homogeneous group of society. It helped in controlling the exogamous marriage system. People say, believed, decreased the risks of genetic diseases that run within families because we don't have exogamous marriage rules in Somalia, and probably not in other African tribes as such. Among the Boran Oromo, it is there the rule of the land. You cannot marry a woman, except that people became Christians and Muslims, and as soon as you become a Christian and a Muslim, you pledge allegiance to your religion and you say, I choose to exit the Boran system. Actually, until very recently, every Borana who became a Muslim or a Christian shall be considered as a person who has exited. You are no more pledging allegiance to the Boran rules. That is how Christianity and Abrahamic religion sometimes disempowered. They could have actually agreed, they could have taught their people, their followers, to respect. You can be a Muslim respecting the rules of the people that live there. It is said that Jesus, when he came, and most of the prophets, they said they did not come to bring new traditions and culture. They said, we are here to perfect. Right? But the Abrahamic religions, everywhere they have gone, their priests and their preachers historically never had the wisdom to respect the traditions. There is nothing that is un-Islamic if a person that is from Ghana continues to marry a woman only from the other moiety, right? But sometimes it's how some of the people that unfortunately became Christians, and they don't want to obey the rules of the Gada leaders. And of course, the Borana believe that whoever became a Christian or a Muslim shall be considered as not being part and parcel. Those things have changed. I am not lamenting that it changed, but I am saying that it actually created a mess, somewhat a mess, a disunity and disharmony. There could have been better ways to do it. If I were, let's say, a religious scholar or a leader, there were many ways you could be a Muslim or a Christian without necessarily destroying the institutions of the people that existed for and lived. And a lot of things are embedded into that system of social security, busa gonofa. It's if you say I don't, you have to, and you have to disentangle. Sometimes these laws are all related to each other. How you govern the people and the land and rights for the animals. The Borana have laws not only for the natural resources but also even for the cattle. There are ways that the Borana has rules for everything. Rules, how to manage natural resources and human beings and animals. And let alone for human beings, they have laws how mankind should treat the environment. And how, if you have to kill an animal and have to live off the meat of a cattle, how you have to treat that cattle. There are rules. I believe the same existed probably among the tribes in the Americas. So Dawe Gobo resolved conflicts, right? He resolved conflicts through perfecting a system and creating an exogamous marriage rules. And then they later on compromised. There were, in my book, that is actually about the roles of traditional institutions among the Boran Oromo and what the roles of the Gumigayo Assembly of 2004. I tried to actually focus on what is described as the Jala Jalto tradition. The Boran sexual and reproductive health philosophies and norms. And my good friend, Professor Mrigisa Kaba, had done his PhD on this. And I believe a lot of other public health and reproductive health experts had studied the Boran and other African tribes' reproductive health and sexual health norms and rules. And one of the Boran Abagada, during his tenure, convinced the Borana to adopt a new system of marriage with a sole purpose of trying not to control sexuality, but trying to bring peace and stability between the tribes, between the clans, among the clans. Every man shall be born to a man or a woman from this moiety and and then your other parents, biological parents, is from the other moiety. But there are compromises after, when this law was actually was enacted, there were a lot of resistance from women, and women voices and disagreements had to be accommodated. Seera Dawe, Seera not Seera Dawe, sorry, that was another. Seera Dawe is the rules of the liberal Borana in the territory where I was from, and Seera Dawe is another. Dawe Gobo. I don't know if Seera Dawe the was after Dawe Gobo's rule, but the Boran that lived in the territory I am from, called Teltele, is considered to be the Boran that is a little bit more liberal, and that was allowed to have a different set of rules as compared to the conservative Borana of Arero, and maybe the administrative capital of the Borana is Arero, where people are extremely conservative, and where the conservative and the leaders lived. And there were people that were on the periphery, living with the other tribes that are non-Oromo, Konso or others. And I yet to understand all of the reasons why Ser Dawe existed. I now believe philosophically it was a compromise, agreeing to allowing people to have a different set of rules, just for the sake of peace and harmony, harmonious living. You don't impose the values of the Borana of Arero and the conservative Borana on the other Borana that lives on the periphery, that probably had to interact with other ethnic groups and conquer and live in maybe a very harsh and difficult environment. Maybe a little bit different set of rules for the sake of peace and harmony. It's dialogue, negotiations, and compromise. Sometimes peace could be maintained through art. In China, Sun Tzu had this book, right? The Art of War. Even war, there are times where a war should not be fought, and there are times where war should be fought. And there are times that calls for a leader that knows how to reconcile differences between groups that have seemingly unreconcilable differences. It can be reconciled. It was done 300 years ago. 300 years ago, an Oromo man, a Gada leader, wanted to create peace. And he takes the credit of being a lawmaker that the Oromo had ever seen. After, there was another Macha Oromo lawmaker I don't know much about, called Makobili. But that of Dawe Gobo, it is in history regarded as the most consequential lawmaker of the Boran people. Creating a system that exists, actually creating a system of marriage. Or we could argue that he was the leader and therefore he might take that credit, but there were Gada leaders and counselors with him who actually advocated for those changes, whose group managed to have the law passed at the Gumigayo Assembly, and therefore Dawe Gobo shall be remembered as the greatest lawmaker and peacemaker. of the Boran Oromo. Another thing that I want to talk about very shortly is inclusion and alliance. I was talking with a friend of mine today, Samalin Balai, who lived, an Oromo from the center, worked and lived among the Boran, happened to be a very good friend of mine. We often talk about, they used to manage rangelands and do the NGO work, and I used to study and learn. And they have learned along with me. But I was talking to him about inclusivity. Peace can be also maintained through inclusion of others. I was telling him how we have, it is also in my book, The Edgy. When the Borana proclaimed their laws of the land at the Gumigayo Assembly, I was there, I was listening when they were proclaiming the laws for regulating sexuality and administering resources, pasture, land, and water, and everything, right? One of the laws that was proclaimed was the laws about the prerogatives of the Geda leaders. Of course, when you are a leader or president, you have certain prerogatives and privileges in the society. One of the groups that had the prerogatives and whose prerogatives were proclaimed were the Edgy. And I said, who are the Edgy? The Edgy are the Ogaden and other Somali tribesmen who lived among the Boran, in the Boran country, who pledged allegiance to the rule of the Boran wherever they lived within their jurisdiction. And they are a useful part of the society. They could trade, bring in items that the Boran needed from, maybe the Boran at that time did not have that much of an access to the coastal areas of Indian Ocean, where you have maybe clothes and things that you need. The Edgy, I'm not talking about the Somali clans that live on their own, homelands. I'm talking about pockets or groups or individual families that lived, whether it is in the Dire territories of Borana, Moyele area, or etc. They have a prerogative to water their animals even before the common people. There are the Hayus, the Hayu, and then the Jalabas, their assistants, and Abarera. People water their animals according to their prerogatives. And one of the people who have prerogatives, even more than the common people, to water their animals at major wells are the Edgy. The Edges are known to be non-Oromo. They speak Oromo because they live there. They probably some of them speak Somali, but they are accepted as a naturalized Somali, naturalized into the Oromo, and with a privilege given for being an integral part of that society, and for the role that they could play, they are treated nicely with prerogatives that are special, and therefore their loyalty to the state, to that country, and the people that they live with is so good. The Edgy, that is called inclusion for peace. You don't only bring peace by conquering and subjugating people. You can treat them nicely and teach them the laws of the land that they shall be held accountable to, and And when you actually conquer a people, because wars are fought, but what gives you the legitimacy is your rule that is fair and just. How do you treat your conquered subjects? Do you treat them fairly? Do you probably give them privileges when they pledge allegiance and contribute to the growth of the development of your society? One of the Boran Hayu, a clan leader that I came to learn about, was Guyo Elo. Guyo Elo is an example of how you don't only conquer and probably rule over, but whichever tribe or group their country is conquered, as long as there is fairness and justice for all, equal for all, they shall probably give their best to that country and people that they are now part of. They will forget even the conquest and become a better you. So Guyo Elo was a small boy. I was told, I hope I'm wrong in what I'm saying. Guyo Elo was captured when back in the days, the earth was not populated by as many human beings as today. So his people probably have fled. And wars were fought, families probably fled the villages, and a child was captured. A boy was captured on a well. He was captured and brought into the system. He was given a new identity. His adopted family. He was adopted. That system is called Gudifacha, right? I think, or maybe, he was adopted, and he was adopted by a Karayu man, and raised very well. And Guyo Elo was so brilliant, was so wise. And now he was adopted when he was a little child. He grew up there. He became a warrior. He became a Hayu, or a leader of his clan, the biggest clan in Borana, the Karayu. A child that was born from a bloodline that was not Borana, him being from a conquered, maybe tribe, did not matter. What matters is the loyalty that he pledged and the contribution that he made. He had joined the tribe. He had accepted his new identity. He had fought for the people, for the country, and he had earned his place as the leader of his tribe. Guyo Elo became a Hayu of the Karayu. He was actually given the nickname Guyo Elo because he was captured on a well in Borana Ela. I hope everything I'm saying is correct. But my interpretation is this. My interpretation is you don't believe in bloodline as such. It is the cohesion, the togetherness. Someone maybe Buyoelo assimilated. Maybe it was because not only of assimilation, he knew of his belonging to another, but the Boran has perfected a system where individuals' membership in society is not necessarily based on bloodline. It is citizenship. He became a citizen. He was adopted. He was ritually included into that society, and he became a citizen with all the privileges and the rights. He shall not be held to a different standard. He wasn't. That is how he became the best fighter, the best Hayu counselor, and the leader of his clan, the Karayu, Hayu. That is, my friend, inclusion. The other is Konso. In my home country, my home district of Teltele, the Konso are regarded as the pillar of that society. Borani manjedam Konso irrigid. Irri means when you build a house, there are things that you use to strengthen the foundation of that house. And the Borana did not only believe that the Konsos are one of the foundations of their society and existence, but they treated them so well. If you have a ritual animal that was sacrificed, you shall give a part of the animals, the sacrificed, preserved only for a Konso. I consider this to be a resource sharing. It is a respect. Because the Boran have a lot of cattle. The Konso live in the mountains. They are agrarians. And some of the Konsos would come and live also among the Borana. They probably would produce crops. They may not have as many cows and cattle as the Borana, right? When a Borana would actually has a ceremonial, animal that was killed. Maybe it could be a naming ceremony of your child, or Mogasa, or Gudifacha. That ceremonial animal that was sacrificed, a meat shall be given, a meat designated to be given only to a Konso that lives among you. That, I believe, is resource sharing and admiring. It's a societal way of appreciating the contributions of others, plus also supporting those who within the community may not be as fortunate as you are. The Konso, maybe they don't have too many livestock. They came from the highlands and now they live among you. And now you have to support them, and by so doing, you nurture harmony and togetherness, the belongingness. Of course, some of our very immature politicians may have wronged. We have the TPLF and the PRDF that ruled Ethiopia and totally destroyed the social fabric of our people, and where the politicians that they tried to use were just immature of people with very low place in society. They used the low lives and totally disenfranchised some of our systems. And I regret to say that The council um, may not have been in the recent past treated with the utmost respect and place, not only in our society, but within the governments of that country. They deserve what the Borana call Handarafa Dalu, everything that that country has to offer, whether that is positions within the government at highest level, ambassadors, etc. That is the way to honor their role in the Oromo and Ethiopian society. Not like just lip service. No, you give them the best positions if for they're educated. They have served our people and their own, and I think it's time for even Oromia, Ethiopia to honor these smaller tribes, the best and the brightest among them, to serve in their rank and files of the government. With that, I conclude my today's talk. It is about peace building and reconciliation, the roles leaders and institutions can play. And I hope that there shall be peace, security, and stability in Oromia, in Ethiopia. We know that there are rogue elements everywhere. There is a lot of injustices done by a lot of state and non-state actors. I hope that leaders would learn not only the art of war, but the art of bringing peace and stability. And that we shall have an enduring peace and prosperity. And let us look back and learn from our history. Let us hold ourselves accountable to our institutions and have leaders that are accountable, have leaders that don't serve until they are deposed, but be willing to go when their time has come. With that, I will say Oromo have contributed the most remarkable Gada system and conflict management systems to mankind, and we shall use it. Thank you.